And welcome back. As we mentioned prior to our first commercial break, our conversation this morning to start off our first segment is a discussion with the director of the Good Governance Unit. We have been joined in studio by none other than Cesar Ross. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And we are here to discuss corruption and the activities for Corruption Month. Let's begin by perhaps being able to define for our viewers, because some of us may have a loose idea of what corruption is. Let's put into context what corruption is for persons in public life and persons in private life, and get an understanding of what it is that we're facing.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. And this event leads up to December 9th.
Okay.
We'll get into that. The term corruption, and we sort of get our definitions from the conventions and from the reviews that have been conducted by whether the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, that's responsible for UNCAC, or MESISIC, which is the OAS, Inter-American Convention Against Corruption. And what they look at when they look at corruption is any act, whether in the public sector or in the private sector, that sort of contributes to the misuse of the resources that could otherwise be used to benefit in the public sector, the government spending and government responsibility or mandate to provide services for the citizens, for the people of Belize, or in the private sector, how it affects whether industries, whether companies, institutions, insofar as not allowing for the best productivity, the maximum resources that they should otherwise be able to obtain as such. No? And one of the key areas also is in not only the public sector and the private sector, but the relationship between the public sector and the private sector as such, and the nature of the interaction that goes on between the public and private sector.
Traditionally, we've all frowned on the idea of persons in public life being engaged in certain activities that we describe as corrupt. But a great many times we don't look at the interrelationship, as you've mentioned, between those in public life versus, well, I say public office, sorry, versus those persons who are in the private sector, the business community, who enable these kinds of activities to take place. It's oftentimes we're looking for a bribe or a deal or to expedite certain services, and then
or even the general public, when it wants to get something a little quicker than the standard, and tries to facilitate it through whatever means, whatever connection, whatever little bribe they can to get it.
What is interesting about it is that we describe it in the round as the Belizean way, right? We know somebody in the office, we know somebody, and then we just give a little golden handshake and get the business going.
And then the only time that we, decide to call it out is when it doesn't work in our favor. Right? So at this point in time, and I think everybody here is guilty of making it, but do we use the term as loosely as just saying we're asking for a bribe here and there as public and private citizens?
Yes, I think we have to look at all its measures as such in all its facets, and how it contributes to a culture as such of corruption. And so when we look at UNCAC, or when we look at MESISIC and the implementation of those, one of the first things they tell us, make your people understand that it's not only the big fish that will be held responsible as such, that by the time all the articles of these conventions are implementable, we can say the right acts, the right policies, the right foundational policies are there, that it will be across the board.
So we're having this conversation, and admittedly what's on my mind is the fact that you have certain structures in place to either prevent or deal with the perception of people being corrupt, more so those who are in public office.
Yeah.
But just last week, there was a publication of 79 names of persons who are in public life, who are yet to declare and yet to submit to the Integrity Commission what their assets are, their earnings, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And we're talking about trying to move away from these kinds of questionable actions. What's your response to something like that?
And not surprisingly, some of these individuals, it's years that they have not declared the assets as such.
Yeah.
When the act under which that declaration of assets operates under the Integrity Commission Act, there is clearly a deadline.
Yeah.
And you can apply for a deadline, and you are given a sort of a partial extension, and then after that it's supposed to be $100 a day, in which you're supposed to be charged. So if all of these things are implemented to the details, there are some people that owe the government a lot of money out there.
But then the thing about it is that in this instance, the hands of the police department are tied because they have to wait for instructions from the DPP's office in terms of that particular office getting the files and so on and so forth. So we're sitting on the sideline, we're thinking, well, why hasn't this particular person declared after 5-10 years perhaps? And it's $100 a day, as you've mentioned. That's revenue that the government can collect.
But also, how do you collect all of that revenue if the person doesn't have it at hand? What are the consequences then? What are the actions that take place after they've been given this, I don't know, you want to call it the, their severance. They have to serve up and they have to give up their assets. Is there something like that that's in place? What happens after you get called out and say, all right, you have accumulated $100 a day for 7 years, 365 days, 7 years, $100 each day.
Yeah.
What happens after?
There is supposed to be the mechanisms. There is supposed to be the mechanisms to ensure that is, because even the DPP has to wait for what does the Integrity Commission present, what investigation has been conducted.
And that's what I'm saying. So we're waiting for the policeman to come and lock them up, but there's a whole system and a whole process in place before we get there.
And then as you get there, this stuff is still accumulating because you still have to wait on the process, right? To be finished. So when we're talking about these kinds of situations and this level of corruption that takes place, is it because we're now in this, we're comfortable, I guess, with our culture of no accountability when these things have occurred for the past decade or more?
When you mention that, you kind of make two different light bulbs and come to light in my head, because in one hand we are looking at constitution reform. And that's one of the things that we have noticed, one of the major gaps there is. I tell my students that there's a beautiful code of conduct in the Constitution that people swear to or affirm to as such. But then, like, my students always ask me, say, then what? After they swear and they go out and do the same things that they promised not to do, then what happens? And so there has to be reforms, clearly. And those reforms have to come with certain teeth, with certain penalties, with applicable process.
Here's a thing. Okay, in the previous administration, I was frustrated many days when I hear the teachers, the public officers, and their respective representative bodies clamoring for the UNCAC to be signed and put into force. And I think, my opinion, everything was done to frustrate that process.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's when I look at it from a reporter's point of view and the coverage that was given to it. Everything was done deliberately to drag as long as possible the process to completion. In that vein, I commend this administration for starting off with a good governance unit where we can start looking at political, constitution, and other forms of reform. But it's a process. It's not something that happens overnight. It's going to be something where we have to walk with each other from the beginning all the way through to the end. I look at scenarios where, for instance, you have legislation now that deals with persons who should be able to explain how they've come by or amassed their wealth or the resources that they have at hand as perhaps a step in the right direction. Because when we look at, and April and I were talking earlier about politicians, they rise to power and they become super wealthy and what have you. Okay, so how did you get to that point?
Exactly.
So now there's a law that says, okay, you must be able to declare how you've come by the resources, and if it's not, you know, a rational or a proper way of coming about it, then you have to be able to answer to it.
And there's another law that even takes it further, the one that was just passed in July of this year, the Civil Asset Recovery and Unexplained Wealth Act, that puts it in the hands of the FIU to do the investigation and to hold people responsible for that unexplained wealth that have been acquired over time as such, no, and holding their feet to the fire. And it's a civil process, so it's a much easier process because it doesn't have to go through the whole criminal process as such, no. So there's that. But you know, one of the things that I realize and I want to bring to the attention of the public, we have been talking about UNCAC so much and waiting for UNCAC so long. Do we realize that from 1996 we have signed on to the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption? And that one is applicable. We are under that. That has put out a number of reviews on the country of Belize. I remember I was asked, can I give an update on the conflict of interest article? And then when I looked through the files and look through what government has, I realized that from 2010, Messisic did a review of Belize and its state and where it was when it comes to conflict of interest and made a series of recommendations
that we have not
that acted upon.
Everything boils down to ultimately political will or the lack thereof. So we have all of these things in place. We know what we need to do. But do we have the inner motivation to say, as a government or as a people, let's move towards being able to accomplish these particular objectives?
I want to be optimistic. I think there is the movements that are occurring in the past 2 years. Not only the good governance unit as such, the public speaking to the empowerment of the Integrity Commission, giving it the teeth it needs, the resources it needs, the empowerment of the Ombudsman, the drafting of a new Auditor General Act, well, a new Auditor General Bill at this point in time, that sort of focuses on empowerment and creating a sort of independent entity as such. So I think, I am hopeful. And so one of the things we want to do and why we are here is because we want to make the public begin to become aware of what is the corruption that is, you know, out there and that we have to hold ourselves accountable to at all levels, and what are the processes, right? And so this is what we want.
But how do you shift a culture that is used to this kind of behavior? And I don't mean to trump on the positiveness, right? It's good to be optimistic, but we've kind of already started to raise our kids with the sense of, if you want to be successful financial wise, you become a politician, because that's the only way you make money, right? And that shouldn't be so. You're a civil servant to us as the people, and that kind of behavior continues on to brew until they eventually become adults and vote in that kind of way. So how do you shift that kind of behavior in a country and a community that's already used to it?
Yeah. I think there's two motions that have been set in play by this administration. One, the People's Constitution Commission and the reform process that is hoping to generate from the public as such. Notwithstanding, this process was not like the 1999 process that was society driven.
Yeah.
This one, the government decided to motivate the society to make the proposals as such. No? So there's that process, and we're hoping that through that process, society begins to look at what can be changed, what in the Constitution can be developed to make all systems of governance more accountable as such, right?
Yeah.
More transparent, more responsive as such. And then on the other hand, we have the creation of the Good Governance Unit. We have the interaction with UNCAC, the interaction with the more active interaction with MESISIC, even Transparency International. We are doing everything we can to tell Transparency International, please review us, please rank us, rate us, because it's since 2008 that we have not been ranked. And when we reach out, they told us, they said, but we need data. We need data to be able to do an analysis of where Belize is at and what Belize is doing and what are its gaps and things like that.
Look, there are certain buzzwords where when we're growing up and we're listening to politicians and we're listening to the rallying cry of the citizenry, I could recall hearing things like transparency, accountability, and good governance, right? Buzzwords. Now I become a reporter, and part of transparency means that, look, I should be able to invoke the Freedom of Information Act if I want to be able to get certain information from a public office, and it's the most difficult thing. They put everything in your way to prevent you from having access to information that should be public from the beginning. And so you can't help but be cynical when it comes to these things. We say one thing, we do something else, and we get caught up in the semantics of it all.
Yeah. And when the Good Governance Unit was created, they sat us down and they told us clearly, there's a lot of complaints, there's a lot of problems. Develop the agenda, develop the strategies that are needed to improve all of those things, the access to information as such. And so the political directorate made it clear, please do that. And so this corruption sensitization or awareness campaign is to begin that process there. What we want to get out of this is sort of a awareness, but also a partnership with the public, with the private sectors, with the NGO communities as such. And out of that partnership, we want to get at least the beginning of the baseline assessments that are necessary so that the Good Governance Unit could then develop, like a 5-year strategy. These are the things that need to be changed. These are things that need to be fixed so that commitment to accountability, that commitment to transparency and things like that can actually be realized. One of the things that we always point out to our supervisors is the fact that in the last study that was done by, I think it was the Caribbean Development Bank, that in this region here, we looked at Singapore, where 86% of the public trust the government. And we look here, and it's below 34%. Of course.
That was going to be my next question. How do you retain that sort of enforcement of and I'll say enforcement of the laws, because at the end of the day, if you read our laws, if you read our bylaws, if you read the Constitution that is already there, our laws are fair and just. But if a citizen does not know the laws and their rights and privileges as a civilian here, you will never be able to express those rights, right?
Yeah.
And so even if this is completed, even if this is done so well to a T that now we can ensure that there is good governance and that lack of corruption and so removal of corruption and so forth, the people don't trust the government. So we will always be there saying, but how that's a little bit too good to be true. So then now how do you get your entire society to trust you? Again, it goes back to this history of lack of trust, no accountability, no transparency, all of the trust, all of the buzzwords that Isani was mentioning. Because here we are in 2023, where as a people, we watch everything that this government is doing now. Yeah. Everything is on social media. The minute that a blue plate up on the road on a Sunday, we done ready for call and complain. And then there is this lack of talking to the public afterwards because the accountability or us looking at the government is too much, right? So where do we strike a balance?
It will take a lot of public education to get to that point. Minister Usher made it clear to us that his ideal is that that the Constitution helps us move this country from believing in a representative government to a participatory government. One in which there are key elements that allow the people, not every 5 years, not every 4 years or 3 years in municipal and local government as such, but that there is a daily opportunity for the public to participate, to bring certain things to attention, whether it's the initiative system or whatever. And so the ideal is being vocalized.
Yeah.
Now it's getting the reforms to reflect and to actualize those ideals is what will be the challenge, because we have.
So what has that process been like? Because I'm presuming it's a tedious one that requires all hands on deck.
It is, and anytime you meet community members, anytime you meet with a group of people, they are. We hear you, but we're not so sure we trust what you're saying. We're too skeptical.
And that's the thing. That's the thing. We feel as though we've been down this road too many times.
We've been burnt too many times before.
Where trust is a luxury that many a man cannot afford, right? So you can't put trust in your politicians. You can't put trust in certain systems if you feel aggrieved by the very processes.
It's like that abusive relationship where you no longer trust your partner anymore. That's the way that this dance has been with the public and the politicians for so long. It's 42 years of this, unfortunately, right? So what's the process like? And how can we continue to try to retain that?
Well, we're hoping that this awareness, this corruption awareness campaign that we're embarking on, and we are going to make it an annual, a yearly thing as such, is going to begin to, what will come out of it, we don't want it to be just a talk shop. We want real
meaningful actions.
Meaningful results, meaningful. We are going to, in this process here, apart from we're launching a poster, essay, these types of contests, we're going to launch next week, Wednesday, where we discuss, we talk to the public about it, but we're also we're proposing to meet with every line ministry, have an afternoon workshop with every line ministry to make them understand what are these elements that UNCAC, that Mississippi are looking at. What are the things that we have to implement, that looking at, and how we need to change it. How can we mitigate corruption? How can we lessen it as such?
It's a step in the right direction, guaranteed. But, and I hate to be sitting here being skeptical, cynical, pessimistic, and all these other things. I hate to do that. what I'm most concerned about is that there is a likelihood that at the end of this political term, another administration may come to power and do away with all of this. So now we're back at square one. So notwithstanding everything that would have been put into place to try to effect the kinds of changes that we're talking about, again, someone could just simply say, well, we'll do away with the good governance unit and move on to something else that completely places on the shelf everything that you would have, or we would have worked at so far. That's my biggest concern.
Because as you said, it's not the first time. There was a governance unit before, years ago, and it, you know, it sort of died out as such, no? So yes, we are hoping, we are hoping for the conference on the 7th. We're having a full day conference the 7th, and for that conference, we are bringing in a speaker from the UNODC to talk to us about UNCAC's expectations and what are best practices in all of these. We're bringing somebody from the Caribbean to talk about how in parliamentary systems, in our type of systems, they have been able to do certain things as such. No? I mean, Jamaica is the only Caribbean country that has a campaign finance reform act as such. No? So what are the best practices? What are the gold standards as such in the Caribbean? And then locally, we have somebody, we're getting somebody to speak about the independence and empowerment of the Integrity Commission, the Contractor General, the Auditor General, that is much needed. We want somebody from the Women's Commission to talk to us about how corruption impacts women as such. No? In several Latin American presentations that I've heard at the OAS, they talk about corruptions. One of them, the Spanish concept is el pago sexualizado. You know, I remember one Caribbean person referred to it as sextortion as such. No? And so how women are affected by corruption. We are going to have a youth speak to how the youths are seeing corruption and they're undermining this society there that they are supposed to take over as such and inherit. No? And then we want the unions and the business sector to speak to some of these things as such. No?
I guess my final question as you wrap up our segment this morning, and you were listing some of the activities for the conference, but what are there other activities for the month of corruption that we'd like to know about? And you said it's up until the 9th, so that means it already started already. Yes,
we have started with some contests that we have launched with the international theme this year is Uniting the World Against Corruption. So what we have done is we have done an essay, poster, and art uniting Belize against corruption as such. No? And so we have given criteria for that, and we have sent that out into the schools. The Ministry of Education is helping us with that process as such. No? And the Chamber is, the Business Bureau is helping us. The U.S. Embassy is helping us make sure that we can do that. After the launch, next week, Wednesday, we're going to be, for a week, hitting all the ministries there. So we have broken the week into covering like 3 ministries a day and doing an orientation with them. On December 4th, we are promoting an integrity walk. And we want to ask every mayor and every municipal council to lead this integrity walk in every municipality as such. No? And so we want to have that in the morning, 6:30 to about 7:38, and then the mid-morning about 10, we're going to declare the winners of the contest as such. On the 7th, we're going to have a one-day conference in which we have all of these guest speakers, these quality speakers that will speak to corruption in its different facets as such. And then, while all of this is going on, we are going to be putting together the outline and putting in the meat to that outline of a declaration. We want, on December 9th, to launch into the media a declaration by the stakeholders of Belize, a declaration calling for an end to corruption in the public-private partnership, the public sector and the private sector as such. And we're hoping to to invite every single political party leader, let's put it that way, right? And the minister said, make sure it's all of them, no matter how young or how small they are, invite all of their party leaders as such.
Okay.
So even the most recently formed by Mr. Pereira, we want to invite to join and endorse that declaration, commit themselves and to that declaration publicly to the people of Belize as such.
Wonderful. Well, Director of Good Governance, Mr. Cesar Ross, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We look forward to hearing more on the activities lined up for this month, and of course, hopefully we can cover some of the conferences as well. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
And we got to take the break, and when we come back, it's all about International Men's Day. Stay with us. We'll be right back.